Welcome to the Poisoning Podcast. I'm your host, Erin DeLullo. Please like, review, and share this episode with a friend. Today, I'm honored to welcome Lenette Serlo, the founder and CEO of Generation O, the national organization championing children prenatally exposed to opioids. Lenette brings incredible insight driven by her personal journey and her mission to ensure these often overlooked children not only survive, but thrive. Together, we'll explore how this generation deserves our vision, our science, and our unwavering support. Lenette, thank you for joining us on the Poisoning Podcast.
So happy to be here, Erin.
Yeah, so I think you maybe reached out to me a few months ago. The summer is such a blur. It's already like light sweater weather here in West Virginia. And I'm glad you did, because I've been thinking about maternity, so women who are pregnant, and then the children who are born substance addicted. After doing my interview with Anari Patani of KFF Health News, I feel like that was in January, and now here we are in late August, and this may not run to sometime in September. So it's just life. I wish I could talk to everyone as soon as I wanted to. So I'm so glad you reached out to talk about your organization, Generation O. But I think the very first thing we should talk about is, can you explain what neonatal abstinence syndrome is and how it presents in newborn babies?
Absolutely. I'd love to. So when a baby is exposed in utero to opioids, there are other substances that can cause NAS, neonatal abstinence syndrome also. But what happens is the baby is born, and when that umbilical cord is cut, they are no longer receiving the substances that their body became used to. So just like an adult has to go through withdrawal when they stop using opioids and some other substances, a baby has to go through the same thing. So it's just as miserable. It's heart-wrenching to watch these babies. They have a specific high-pitched cry that's unique to babies withdrawing from substances. They get fevers. They're just so uncomfortable, just like anyone withdrawing from a substance. And over the time of the opioid crisis, we've learned a lot. In the beginning, I think not knowing much, people just gave the baby more opioids to kind of help wean them off, which makes sense.
And would that be like a medically assisted treatment, sort of like, would they be getting just straight oxy or cotton, or would they be getting Suboxone or something like that?
Usually after birth, they're given methadone or morphine.
Okay.
Sometimes buprenorphine. They're starting to change it a little bit. The medicated assisted treatment, MAT, is what's given to mom before.
Sure.
Which is actually really interesting, because whether mom is on medicated assisted treatment or MOUD, whether she is prescribed these things by her doctor or she's not in recovery and she's getting illicit substances from the street, either way, there's a very good chance the baby will go through this withdrawal process. And it can last anywhere from, it usually starts within the first 48 hours. So once it starts, it can last a couple of days. It can last longer. Some of these babies end up being in the NICU for weeks, sometimes 2 months. But what they've learned over the years of the crisis is that there's a lot that can be done rather than giving babies more opioids. They've learned about eat, sleep, console, which is a process where you just hold the baby and you console them with skin-to-skin contact, and you feed them whenever they need to be fed, and you pretty much do what the baby's asking you to do. Help me. I'm hurting. I don't know what's going on. And that sometimes is enough to get the babies through this process. Some babies, that's not enough, and then they're given whatever drug that the hospital recommends. Clonidine, I think, is another one. There's different ones out there. But once they're given more, then they have to step down from that before they can go home with mom.
So, in the consoling part, is that just done at home? Is this done in the hospital? Like, should a baby born with NAS, when would they leave the hospital?
They have to be medically stable, so it's
Okay.
going to be a little bit different for each baby. Um, I took two babies home from the hospital that had NAS.
Oh.
So my first baby was born in '09, and back then we were in the early days, and we knew the child was born. My husband and I were looking to adopt a child, and we knew that this little boy had been born when he was a week old. And so they called us and they said this baby's available to adopt. And the first day we met him, had been given morphine and he was in the NICU. There wasn't really anyone there for him. He was lined up with about five other babies that were going through whatever they were going through, and one nurse. So he was in a really tough spot, but he was still jittery. They have those jitters. We
Mhm.
picked him up and we loved on him, and he had a couple more days to withdraw from the morphine, and then he was 10 days old when we were able to bring him home. And then my other son, who was born in 2020, I knew a lot more what to do, and the hospital that he was at, they had a whole unit for babies like this because it's become such a problem. And he was born in Tampa, and Tampa has a particular problem. They're one of the higher cities. So they had a whole wing just for these babies going through withdrawal. And they had the lights dark in the room, everything was calm. The nurses only went in once every while. They didn't constantly, unwrap the baby and everything. And I knew what the baby needed because I'd been through this. So I put him on my chest, skin to skin. We just sat and loved on him. And his withdrawal went pretty smoothly. He didn't need much extra medication to get through it. And it ended up to be the same 10 days when I was able to bring him home. So both of these babies came home when they were completely done with the withdrawal. Sometimes babies come home and they can still be withdrawing for 2, 3, 4 months down the road.
Wow. Well, the challenge is the baby can't tell you what it's feeling. I mean, they've identified this high-pitched scream or cry, but besides that, communication is very challenging in this situation. So, what markers are they judging this on?
Well, if the baby's coming to a hospital to be born and
Mhm.
it's a case of MAT where the mom has been followed and is in recovery, and they can tell the birthing doctors that this is in their system, then everyone can prepare. Mom can be prepared and know what to expect, and the doctors can prepare. But if a woman just comes in to deliver and doesn't, for a lot of good reasons, say, "Hey, I've been using these things during my pregnancy," then no one's aware, and unless the withdrawal starts pretty quickly, then they're not going to know. And that's what happens sometimes, is that a baby would go home and then be brought back to the hospital when the withdrawal starts.
Well, I hope
So,
they're brought back.
we're promoting that
Mhm.
everyone talk to their doctors, but obviously there's a lot of involved in that for the moms.
Oh, sure. What are, some of the hidden challenges that you've experienced as a parent and that you've heard about, that people might not recognize right away with a baby coming out of withdrawal and newborn?
They tend to be hard to feed.
Mm,
And that's, one of the things babies do all the time, right? Is they eat and sleep. And
yeah,
these babies, for a variety of different reasons, are often hard to feed. And that doesn't help them. They also have a hard time sleeping. Their nervous system is dysregulated, and they're in a lot of discomfort, and so they have trouble sleeping. So, if you're a baby and your job is to eat and sleep, and you're not doing that well, of no fault of your own,
sure.
that's not going to go well both for the baby or for mom. Um, but what we've learned is that over the course of time, a lot of study has been put into NAS, and how to treat a baby going through withdrawal. But when they're sent home with, okay, that part's done, everything's good to go, here's your baby. And what 7,000 other caregivers and I have discovered in a group on Facebook where we collaborate is that there's a lot more going on with these kids when they're 2, when they're 5, when they're 10. And
Mm.
Generation O was put together to try and figure this all out. There are some long-term NIH funded studies going on, but the results are going to take a long time to come out.
All right.
And we're living with these kids now, and we see their struggles now. They still struggle to sleep. They still struggle to eat. But in addition to that, they have vision problems. They have motor and muscle dysfunction. They have very high anxiety, again, with the nervous system dysregulation. And there's a lot of needs that they have that the parents aren't warned about. And even when they bring them to the pediatrician isn't being trained about this. So the pediatrician isn't able to give them the support they need. And these poor kids are just, kind of in limbo, and we don't hear about them. We don't know what to do with them. And it's kind of been a ground roots thing to just try and educate the people that find us. This is what we know helps.
Yes, so you let's talk about long-term development. You've just mentioned a few things, but you are a mom who has adopted how many children, Lynette?
I've adopted 4. 2 of them
Four.
were born with NAS.
Okay, from straight opioids or polysubstance, or you don't know, or
Um, you can never know for sure, but
right.
one of them is opioids and benzos, pretty much.
Mm.
The other one is more polysubstance. There was quite a few different things.
Wow. Were the moms in medically assisted treatment?
No, neither of
No.
these were.
Okay. So you got it, like you got the like real deal right in front of you. The
Yep.
moms were, no, I mean, really, the moms weren't, and for whatever reason, can't change it. Why dwell on it? But they weren't working with a doctor to might help prepare the baby for the situation. But you just knew they were on substances. They were going to give up their child for adoption, which is a wonderful decision for them to make. So you have two and different ages, I assume, since it's what you
Yeah,
said.
one's 15 and one's 5 right now.
Okay. Wow. And what long term, if you don't mind sharing, challenges have you seen over this time frame?
Um, we've seen my 15-year-old. He didn't present with much early in life, which a lot of these kids, starting at the 3, 4-year-old, which I know you have kids, Erin, and threes and fours when they start to learn the word no and want to be independent, those can be some fun ages. But with these kids, it's like cranked way up.
Mm,
And the intensity of the defiance and the length of the tantrums and the frequency of the tantrums, it's just at a higher level. I didn't experience that with mine, but it's common in this population. When my son got into elementary school, he was a smart kid. I mean, talking to your kid before they go to school, like, wow, this kid's got a brain on him. And he was very good verbally. He could talk conversations 5 years older than what he was. And then when he got to school, he started struggling and it just didn't make sense to me. And so deep dive into it, and it turns out he had these vision processing issues, which both of my boys ended up having. They don't need
mm,
glasses, their eyes are fine, but what they see and how it travels back to the brain, there's kind of a something going on there that doesn't work right. And so they can't explain it to you, but everything about school is hard. Um, we also, both of them have quite a high level of anxiety. And A lot of times I think about it in the fight or flight, like their bodies are kind of stuck in that fight or flight.
Mm.
They were born into that and they've never really felt that safety. So they're just walking around life like that. And it's tough. It's tough for, you don't want to see your
Mhm.
child like that and you want to be able to help them. And, there's different techniques we've tried and different therapies. And my second child went to early intervention and he got help with occupational therapy and physical therapy in his first 3 years of life. It made a huge difference. The trajectory for number two is much different than the trajectory for number one because he was able to get those services. And that's one of the biggest things that we promote is that these services exist and these kids exist. We just really need to match them together for the health of the kids in the long term.
So Generation O is giving a direction on what type of support caregivers need to provide these children.
Yes, yes, we try and give guidance and try and help them understand that even if the pediatrician says, "Oh, they'll grow out of it," this is what we're seeing long term. And so if you're seeing these early signs, you might want to take a closer look.
How many children born with NAS are living with their biological mothers? Do you know? Is there any fact statistics out there?
Um, it- it's hard to get them, but I have seen that by the age of 9,
Mm-hmm.
50% of them are no longer with their biological mother. So,
50% of
yeah.
children born addicted are no longer with their biological moms. I mean, it makes sense. The mom's struggling, and it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard to deal with young children.
It's hard, and,
Wow.
and then these babies are particularly hard. I want to just educate you really quick, Erin.
Please.
Um, Babies cannot be addicted. They
Oh,
are born exposed
exposed.
and they
Thank
suffer
you.
through their withdrawal, but they don't have the mental component to have an addiction. And so
So
it's
once they're weaned off, they don't have the craving for it.
correct.
Wow, that's great, but it's just all the other issues that came along.
And we also don't know what's going to happen to them when they're in their teen years or in their 20s and they come
Mm.
across substances and they try substances. Um, Other studies, not with this population, show that kids with ACEs and kids that come from hard places are much more likely to be some substance users themselves. And so it can be assumed that these kids are going to struggle more as adults even if they get all the right services because their bodies are set up to they've already experienced these things.
What is ACEs?
ACEs are the adverse childhood experiences that
Mm.
any child can go through. There's a set of about 10 of them. um, the hardest things like living in poverty or living in violence or the things that kind of predispose a child to having things a little bit rougher later on.
The trauma.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. So if not all pediatricians are educated in their medical training about children, neonatal abstinence syndrome, and babies and children with it, how well are schools prepared for this problem?
You live in West Virginia. You can answer that one.
It's a challenge here. I mean, I think we have just as many babies as California, maybe more born addicted in the last, or not born addicted, born exposed in the last study that was put out, which was released in 2023. But it equals to be about, did the math on this. We have about 1 in 7.5 babies born with NAS, so they're exposed in the womb. And that could be to polysubstance. They didn't break it down. And there were about 16,000 births that year. So that could be, I think it was around 2,000 on average, something like that.
That's a lot.
No, it wasn't 16,000, but I did the math. I did use a calculator. I forgot to bring it up, but it's a lot. It's a lot for a small state with limited transportation. You know, we don't have metros here. It's Uber is not always a possibility in certain places in West Virginia. So you think, how are parents even getting those extra services when you're having to go? Let's talk about extra services. You maybe go to physical therapist, right? And then what else could they go to?
Well, one, I mean, I hope there's some services like this in West Virginia. I'm not as familiar with your state, but in a lot of states, they come to the home.
Oh,
So
that's wonderful.
yeah, and they actually, that's what I received when I went through it 5 years
Hmm.
ago. Occupational therapists came to the home and worked on my child. So did a physical therapist. And speech and language is another thing. So early on, they're dealing with the feeding. But then when the kids get older, this population of kids has a higher than normal circumstance of speech and language problems.
Mm,
So my son, my younger one, is currently getting speech therapy because he's just behind, and it's common in this population. The other thing that's interesting is that the babies born with NAS are tracked. They have to be tracked by the hospitals and things. But every baby who's exposed to opioids in the womb does not
mhm.
have NAS.
Mm,
Or if they go through the withdrawal and the eat, sleep, console works, they just need mom to hold them for a couple of extra days and they don't need any extra medication, those sometimes aren't recorded as an NAS baby. And so I recently saw a study that showed double the amount of children. So if your state was seeing the NAS rates, one for every 7.5 kids, there's actually probably two if
right.
you're looking at all kids that are opioid exposed. And whatever you go through at birth is not related to what you will experience long term. It's not like if you have an easy withdrawal, everything else is going to be easy. There's no correlation there.
Well, and your two children, well, I know you have several children, but the two that had NAS were blessed to be adopted by you and your husband. But here in West Virginia, we have the highest rate of grandparents raising
Mhm.
grandchildren. And I feel there's no math on this or statistics, but it wouldn't surprise me if some of these NAS children who are not adopted or parents leave the picture and grandma and grandpa are raising them and often on a limited budget, are they able to get the services? Are even grandma and grandpa able to identify the issues going on? So these other caregivers, or are they put in foster care and no one,
Yeah.
I wrote my weekly column, I think it was in January, it's called The Kids Aren't All Right. And
Mhm.
I do worry about this, I mean, whole generation of children born with this issue and exposed to these drugs, and then everything that happens decades later.
Yeah, we do too. We do too. There's way too many unknowns, and we can help some families, guide them into some
Mhm.
helpful things, but we don't have all the answers, and science doesn't have all the answers. And these are guinea pigs out there. We had worked some numbers at some point, and we think that at this point in the crisis, in the opioid crisis, there's enough of these babies to fill over 6 professional football stadiums.
And how many
For
people sit in a football stadium? I
it's
don't
a
think I've
little,
been to a professional football game. I'm going to be honest, Lynette.
we're looking at 500,000 kids.
So
There's
half a
half a
million
million kids
kids,
out
and
there.
not all of them were adopted by the Serlos. So, um, yeah, it's a lot of people. It's
It
a
is. And
lot of people that could have issues and they don't even know why they have the challenges they have.
absolutely.
Mm. It's, my goodness, it's staggering. It's really staggering. Do you deal with any other, do you provide assistance to any other families that have children that may be exposed to NAS, but not necessarily to opioids? Maybe it's meth, maybe it's another drug out there. Or I feel like if you're doing one, you're probably trying a few,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah.
Potentially. I mean, these aren't the days of Oxycontin being prescribed by your doctor anymore. So
Right.
if you might be doing one street drug, the chances are you don't really know what's in your street drug.
Mm.
That's just the reality,
Yeah.
which is why fentanyl and nitazines kill so many people because nobody's thinking it's in their street drugs. Um, so anyway, are there other parents reaching out to you where they say my child's bit, or even you mentioned benzos, um, which we have like what 26 million people in America on benzos right now, like
Oh, wow.
prescribed.
Wow.
Yes, yeah. So there's just a lot out there. So do these resources help those families too?
Yes, yes. So the support group that we have on Facebook, we get about 150 new members a month. And these are caregivers who are raising a substance exposed child. It could be the grandparents, it could be the aunt, it could be
Mhm.
foster parent or adoptive parent. We do have some bio moms that come in,
Great.
but it's primarily the other types of families, and they're just like, "What do I do? Is this normal? How do I cope with this?" And some, depending on your relationship and how you came to parent that child, some know more than others about what the child was exposed to. But I did notice in the last year and a half or so that a lot more people are asking about meth exposure.
Mm.
And, one of my children was exposed to meth and one of my other ones. And so, there's different signatures for each of these drugs. The meth exposed babies tend to be a lot easier to handle in the beginning. They just sleep. They sleep. They don't
Wow.
do anything, so they're the opposite type of baby as an infant. Longer term, it's hard to tell. And we have alcohol exposure and all the research
Sure.
that's been done, 50 years of looking at fetal alcohol exposure. There are some overlap, in what has been learned about those families and what these kids have. Some of the behavioral techniques and things used to help families with fetal alcohol exposed children help with these kids too. But yet they don't have the vision problems or the feeding problems or sensory processing as much. I mean, it's a different signature. So, you know, when you have a whole combination of them, who knows, And then each child is different, how they're
Sure.
going to respond.
Do you have any stories that, without using names, like real names at least, that you'd want to share of where, there was someone you provided hope to?
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I know of a baby who's a little boy. He's 3 right now, and he lives in Minnesota. And adorable kid, just the cutest little kid. But his parents brought him home from the hospital as after his NAS had been medically, sound. And they were given this little baby and told, okay, here you go. Here's your bundle of joy, brand new parents, young couple. And they took him home and really, really have struggled because he's been so hard and, to no fault of his own, they're reaching out, getting as many resources as they can. But he was diagnosed at one point with failure to thrive because he's just not eating. And even at his age now, he's
Mm.
smaller than his peers, smaller than the other 3-year-olds because he just won't eat well. And then that leads to other things, sleeping, and he's got some visual problems. And, he wants to go play with everyone else, but, he's got some handicaps there. And she and the couple raising him wants to do everything they can, and they're trying everything they can, but there's not a lot of answers. And
Mm.
so, by coming to our group, they were able to see that they weren't the only one in this situation. And, when certain things pop up, this is what we're experiencing with our little 3-year-old, and someone else in the group will pop in and say, "Oh, did you try this?" Or, "Oh, this worked for me." And so that kind of stuff really does give these families hope. When we talk to other moms about our child, it's they don't really understand. They can't. They're not
Mm.
living with these kids. And so it's only within this Facebook group that a lot of us feel seen and heard and get the resources that we're really looking for.
So, Generation O has pushed for opioid settlement funds to support these children. How specifically could those dollars be used to mitigate the long-term effects of neonatal abstinence syndrome?
Um, I've got about 10 different things.
Okay, well, we have a little time.
Yeah. So we've one of the programs that I think is the easiest and simplest to fund and to enact is, we call it Thrive Points, and we're connecting with these families. Our initial pilot is connecting with the babies when they come out of the NICU, so we're connecting with the infants, and we're connecting them to our portal where we have an educational multimedia course that they can follow. And it teaches them what they need to know to handle these babies at home once they're not around the
Mm.
doctors and the nurses anymore, and what they need to look out for long term, and how they can get connected with the free resources that their state has. And so by going through this course, they earn points, and then they can exchange those points for toys and gifts and things that help the mom and the baby's development. And then in the future, we'll have courses where if we don't come across someone until the child is 4 years old, well, there can be a child journey and a school age journey. So all the different things you have to know at the different ages. We've proposed that in a couple of different places. We haven't gotten approved yet. So that's the easy one. The harder one, which is just as important, was proposed in Tennessee last year. And in Tennessee, they have a program where foster children that have developmental differences get kind of like an HSA healthcare card where you can use to pay for like the therapies and the stuff that it doesn't cover by insurance.
Mm.
So if you need, for instance, you might need more than one occupational visit a week. If you need 3 or 4, that's very expensive. Insurance
Yeah.
isn't going to pay for it. So we wanted to provide a card with cash on it that they could use for these specific services. And since Tennessee already had one similar to this in place for all foster kids, we just
Oh.
wanted to adapt it for kids with the NAS diagnosis. And unfortunately, and I'm sure this won't surprise you, is we put in the bid and we did the grant work and all the things. And then after the grants were in, the board decided that they only wanted to give funding to nonprofits that were in business at least 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not the one, not all the ones that, so we got kicked out, didn't get that one. We've also asked for funds for a partnership with a program called Baby Steps. That's like a helpline for resources where moms can just text in. And the thing that would be different than a helpline for any parent is that these babies are different. And so the advice that applies to all moms doesn't always work for these moms. So this would
Right.
be a text line. And so we're kind of going from state to state and looking for grants, looking for availabilities, and applying for what we can. We really want to get a provider directory of physicians and therapists who understand how to work with these kids. We'd really like to get the physicians educated. There's an
Oh.
organization we're partnered with in Kentucky called NASEND, and they educate physicians on how to help these babies. And some hospitals have gotten the education, but most haven't. So there's all sorts of ways.
So if you could shift the national conversation about babies born with NAS, what would you wish every policymaker understood?
I would like policymakers to know that Generation O exists. Generation
Mhm.
O, the kids, the generation of kids that were born prenatally exposed within the opioid epidemic that our country is suffering from. You know, the epidemic gets press all the time. We're always talking about it, but we're never talking about the kids. And they need to be a part of this. They came into this situation by no fault of their own. They're innocent victims and they need support. You know, that they're hurting, their families are struggling, and we just want we want the word out on the street that we exist, that Generation O um, needs help. We're here. And Generation O, the organization, needs a seat at the table so that when we're thinking about these kids, we can help guide and steer and help you understand what we're seeing and what the parents are asking for.
So, yeah, I think there's 2 points. We hear a lot about the crisis, the opioid crisis, the fentanyl crisis, but we hear a lot of it from the supply side, which is keeping the drugs from coming into the country. But I will tell you, as someone who reads about this like every day of her life right now, um, you don't hear you might as much about how do we provide the resources for children or pregnant women to help them, which is the demand side, the
Mhm.
recovery side, and I think that's because of stigma. It's easy to feel good about putting the bad cartel members away, right? I mean, we want them to not have anything to do with our country and keep their product out of our country. But at the same time, because we judge and have so much stigma around addiction, we don't even want to like talk about it. I'm gonna have an episode out on kratom,
Yeah.
which whew, wild. I don't go into vape shops much, but I'm gonna go into one now. Actually, I've never been in a vape shop. Anyone? Never been. It hasn't been
Me
part of my
neither.
routine. Got to go visit a few. It's probably going to be eye-opening. But there was a 2-year-old who overdosed on kratom. So we heard about that, and she was revived with naloxone, which I have right back there on the shelf. Among many other places in my life, I have naloxone. But that's like a shocking story, right? It's shocking. But then there was a good, feel good. The 2-year-old was revived and, got help and yay. But no one goes, okay, guys, what's the long-term effects on society and families from these babies born with NAS? It's
Yeah,
like too
I think,
complicated. It's
yeah,
almost like too complicated, I feel
you
like,
know,
for people are like, oh, then you have to explain, and I don't know if I want to start explaining.
it's true. But one of the things I gives me hope about this problem is that it's not that difficult to solve. All of the resources that these kids need already exist. You know, we're not having to create a whole new system or create treatment paths and things that aren't already there. There may not be enough workers in the cities and towns and states that need them, but there's people in every place that has these kids that can do these, that can help them. You know, these systems exist. We just need to plug them in. And by identifying that these kids exist and have these struggles, we can then plug them in to the services that already exist. We're also trying to get a longer term diagnosis because
Mm.
even if you get a diagnosis of NAS, which, like we talked about, there could be 50%, There could be double the amount of kids out there not even getting the NAS diagnosis at birth if they don't, you know. So, but even if you get it, in certain states that automatically qualifies you for services, but in other states it doesn't. And those services usually only go till the age of 3, maybe 5. Some of the problems that we see in these kids don't even emerge until then. You know, they may not get any services when they're young because they don't need them. But then when they get into school and life gets a little bit more tricky, that's when we start to see the problems emerge. And that's when it would be helpful to have, just like FASD has the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder,
Mm-hmm.
we would like to have an opioid exposed child spectrum disorder of some type. That way we can identify these kids. Because your question about school, you know, they come to school, a lot of them struggle in a school setting, but they don't have a diagnosis. So we don't know who they are. We don't know what to do with them. Generation O is collaborating on a study to get the data to document all of these long-term. I mean, we see them, but we don't have documentation. So we're going to
Sure.
get the data to document it. And one of the reasons we're doing that is because we really want that to move towards getting a diagnosis for these kids, because I see what happens to a 15-year-old, but I don't know what's going to happen to my son when he's 25. I know it's still
Right.
going to be affecting his life, but I don't know how.
My aunt was a foster parent, and I can't remember, and this is when I was young, and they lived in the same neighborhood as us. She adopted at least one child with alcohol fetal syndrome. And I mean, it was obvious,
Mm.
even to me, like as maybe a 10-year-old, that there was something wrong with my other cousin because there was like a facial feature
Mm.
issue, which I
Yeah.
think is a common indicator. And then you could just tell they had a slower processing.
Yeah.
So we know that. And after almost what, 25 years of this crisis, we don't have a diagnosis.
No,
Hmm.
don't have one yet.
Hmm.
There's a lot of
Is
work
there
to do.
any medical association pushing for this? One of the major medical associations pushing for any of this diagnosis?
Not that I'm aware of.
Hmm.
Um, it seems to have to need a groundswell. Yeah, I think some of the reasons you mentioned before, it's a messy situation. It's tricky. It's easy to, you know, it's hard to pick out exactly what an opioid does to a child if they're also being raised in poverty and being exposed to substance use in the home. But the fact that most of the babies that Generation O talks with have been removed from that and they still have these long-term effects, that's what I think makes a big difference. That lets us
Hmm.
see more clearly what the opioid is doing. There has been a study out in April, an NIH funded study that's showing smaller brain sizes, brain volumes in these opioid exposed kids. And it didn't matter whether it was the medication or illicit drugs, they both had reduced brain volumes.
Wow. So
So,
no matter if it was oxy or fentanyl, it's
correct. Or Suboxone or
oh,
um,
I was just having this conversation with a policymaker last week. There's a lot of controversy on medically assisted treatment, and I just watched a documentary. I'm sorry, so many like all these pieces, always puzzle
yeah.
pieces come together every day. I feel like for me, so there's a lot of corruption in recovery, sadly, and sometimes recovery centers will put people on MAT when they don't need to once they've detoxed and then they're putting them back on an opioid, which then can, the craving comes back, right? But then I was talking to this policy, and that's awful. And the people who do that should be punished. I don't know that I'd be a benevolent dictator in that situation. Um, but then, maybe if you have a mom, a mom who's pregnant, isn't it better that she go on MAT than be taking a street pill that you don't know what's in it, could cause them to overdose plus more? So, there's
Yeah.
not like one answer on medically assisted treatment. I think it's case by case, but everybody just wants,
Yeah.
black and white, no gray area,
Yeah.
because isn't that easier?
Yep.
I'm sure it's easier for insurance companies and governments and all of it. But it's something we really have to like take a step back at and go, okay, needs to be situation by situation. But it's a really good point on being exposed from MAT. An opioid is an opioid, I guess,
Yeah.
to a developing baby in the womb.
Yeah, and it makes it difficult because there's two patients, and when
Right.
a mom who's struggling with opioid use disorder becomes pregnant, we're treating the mom the best way we know
Yeah.
how. But there's another patient, and that patient isn't, how do you know? I mean,
Right.
it's so difficult. And, you know, I would rather have a mom on a medication like that than the illicit drugs. I mean, there's no question that that's better. Um, but there are moms that have been on medication for months, years, and they're in a stable, supportive environment and they become pregnant and they're ready to come off. They're like, you know what?
Yeah.
I can do this. I'm ready to do this now. And it might be the right time for them to come off. But there's not very many doctors that will allow that.
Mm.
There are some that allow it, and it's very
Hmm.
successful. As long as they have the support that they need
Right.
and they want to make that decision, they have been very successful, and then their baby doesn't get exposed, and that there's no NAS, there's no long-term effects. But there's not enough doctors out there who are ready to help their patient do that. And, you know, I think there needs to be a discussion where the moms are able to be part of that decision, you
No, I
know?
think it goes back to also like we put everybody in a box, right? So you
Mhm.
either do this or you don't. Like,
Yep.
and if you have struggled with an opioid addiction, then you must do MAT. Um, Actually, I'm going to go see a gentleman tomorrow, runs our recovery center in the next county, and he was a former heroin addict and a guest on the show. Um, and he even believes MAT is a short, it's not a lifetime thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you're young,
It's complicated.
it's complicated. It's
Yeah.
very complicated. So
Yeah.
that's why we need policymakers and decision makers to spend more time thinking about this issue. Well, do you have anything else you'd like to share with our audience, Lynette?
Um, sure, I can come up with something. Yes,
It's
I
okay. I
do.
mean, we've
So,
only been chatting for like 45 minutes,
I
so.
know, I know. Thank you so much for your time, Em.
Yeah. Well, how about this? Where would you like people to go to learn about Generation O?
That's an easy one. GenerationO.org. Easy website, everything's there. Um, I would love for people to subscribe to our newsletter. I would
Perfect.
love for people raising these kids to take a look at all the resources we have. And there's a lot of science there too, if people are interested in learning more from a scientific perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, you know, it's just spread the word that these kids are there and they need help. And we're ready to give them the help. We know what to do. We know what to do for them. We just need that opportunity.
Well, I'm glad you're doing that and that Generation O is providing these resources.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on The Poisoning, Lynette.
Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.